a little introduction to data to insight for anyone who's not already working with us. We have partners in pretty much, we have users at least in every local authority in the country for a couple of our tools, but we have wider reach in different areas. So data to insight is very hard to explain in the kind of abstract because it's not really an organization. It's more of just an idea about how we can do things as local authorities together. And it came out of one shared development project called the CHAT, the Children's Social Care Analysis Tool, which several local authorities in the Southeast, in partnership with Ofsted and the DFE, built as a way of working with the statutory data set that Ofsted had published for their new inspection framework of local authorities. And what the CHAT does is it analyses takes your child level lists that you have to produce for Ofsted, and it provides you a whole raft of different analysis options off the back of that. Around the side of that, Data to Insight now supports 10 different Excel-based analysis tools, each of which is supported by usually 2 or more different local authorities that kind of chip in to keep it running. In some cases, like the demand modelling tool that we'll talk about later, we had 15 people in 15 different organisations involved in developing that. In other cases, it's been more the case that one LA has built something for us and shared it with everyone else because they think everyone will find it useful. But that's the core idea, really, that we can build something once based on kind of common data outputs and then use it anywhere. And it gives that benefit without a massive input of time and effort. Around that, we've built a community which we're trying to grow, and kind of not grow the number, but the level of engagement in terms of people contributing data tools or development work, but also contributing to the drive and the design and the kind of the prioritization of what we do with our central resource. And so that's something that we'll talk a little bit about in another talk that we're doing later this afternoon. For this session, then the focus is really on the kind of worked examples of data tools that we produce that you can fold into your local performance framework and use to get real benefit out of. So in children's social care, there's kind of 2 real key contexts for getting better value out of statutory data. And one of those is in-year analysis and insight. And what we're talking about there is where you've got some set data formats that you produce or can produce at will, and you can load those into an analytical tool like the CHAT that we provide and get up-to-the-minute analysis of your local data aligned with your historical benchmarks, your statistical neighbours, so on and so forth, and use that as part of your performance management in year. The other key kind of context is around post-publication benchmarking. So once you've done your end-of-year statutory returns to the DFE, they'll publish all of that data, and you can go and get it and analyse it however you want. And one of the ways that you can do that is by using the benchmarking tool that we support, where we very rapidly pull the data that the DFE has published into a kind of fixed Excel analysis workbook that will, whatever the DFE do, will present that in a kind of very similar format to what you saw in it last year, and give you very easy ways to pick out your statistical neighbours, your local reference groups, your particular views of data that you want to see. But around that, I've put a link there at the bottom of that screen to the website that hosts these tools. There are other different tools that we support. So there's some stuff that that will allow you to load in your, for example, your statutory return data before it's been validated by the DFE, and get an advanced look at what your performance data is likely to be coming out of that. So you don't have to do all of your error checking and data validation before you can see your performance measures from those returns. We have a whole range of more up-to-the-minute kind of weekly trend analysis dashboards, which we shared thanks to local authorities that were involved last year, particularly around lockdowns and COVID and what have you, which help in that kind of in-year analysis and insight as well. So that's kind of the pitch of what Data to Insight is and the kind of things we support. What we want to do with this session really is work through a few examples. And so we've got 3 examples to work through in turn, and I'll basically say, this is a question, really, what do you know about this? And then hand over to Jean and Teresa to talk a little bit about how that works in Wandsworth. So for example, assessment timeliness. I would be surprised if anyone working in children's social care doesn't have an idea of what their assessment timeliness is looking like as an organisation to some extent. But do you know how close to that 45-day threshold some of your assessments are coming? Or do you know what the breakdown is? Or can you analyse it and look at more detail around that? And that's something that the chat can help with. And again, it's that thing about the data to insight tools, is it's not all of the answer, but it's something that can help with your local context. So I'm going to try and drive slides at the right time, the right kind of pace now, while Jean and Teresa speak to them. So please excuse any irregularities in the performance here. Over to you, Jean and Teresa.
Great, thanks so much, Alistair. Hi everyone, my name is Jean Mallow. I'm the performance manager at Wandsworth, but I'm also one of the regional leads, and I represent London at the NPIMG with Alistair Lee. I feel really, really passionate about reducing duplication when it comes to data analysis and removing that manual side of the work so that the analyst can actually look at what the data is telling you rather than spending the time just churning the data over. And the chat is charts from the bigger chat tool, and just talk you through what these are telling us in Wandsworth, and then Teresa is going to explain what she's actually doing with that information so that you're getting the complete picture. So in Wandsworth, we've got our Annex A 10 lists of data set up in a way that means we can run them very, very quickly. We've done a lot of data quality work, which the chat has helped with to get us into that position. It means that once a month I produce chat, and it only takes about half an hour or so, and it gives you the last 6 months of social care activity, and it compares that to the last 5 years of data that is published by the Department for Education. So on the left hand side is an example of what our assessment timeliness looks like in the published statistics alongside the last 6 months. So you will see that we used to be higher than statistical neighbours and England, but since 2017-18, we have had much lower assessment timeliness in Wandsworth. And although that is on an upward trend in the published data, it doesn't show you that in the last 6 months, we have really improved the assessment timeliness. We're now at 83%, which isn't quite as high as statistical neighbours, but it is very close to the England average. On the right hand side, it shows every single duration for children who have had a child and family assessment. And if you look at it, you'll see that the distribution of the chart is actually from 0 to 60 days, when really we should be looking at a distribution between 0 and 45 working days. And you will see that there's particularly a peak around the 44, 45 and 46 working day mark. So this is telling us that some of our workers and managers are leaving those assessments very close to that time scale of 45 working days, which means that it's much easier for that assessment to tick over into the overdue mark, which then counts against it in that overall performance measure of in time or not in time. It doesn't tell you, is it over time by 1 day? It's just once it's over, it's over. And so it's about presenting this to Teresa, who then makes decisions about how to take this forward with the service. So handing over to you, Teresa.
Hi everyone, I'm Teresa Hills. I'm the Head of Service for Referral and Assessment in Wandsworth, and I've been here for about a year now. One of the benefits and the absolute treat of working in Wandsworth has been access to data. I think we are incredibly blessed and lucky to have Jean, who gives us our performance data, and we get it every week, twice a week. So it's been very good for us to examine very closely where our performance is, why those dips are. I mean, this whole conversation has been interesting with my service in terms of it's shifting the culture, as you will have seen from that sort of slip in data that we've had over the past 2-3 years, and it's gradually building towards understanding why we do what we do by way of our assessment, and why do we wait till the 45th day or around that period to complete our sort of write-up of assessments. And actually, when we looked at those together, it was a case of writing things up. And what we've shifted is the first line managers owning and looking at this data. So there's a real push for all of them. They go and use the chat tool that comes up once a month. They look at the weekly tracker to plan their work. And in doing that, in shifting that position, what we've found, and which we unfortunately don't have that data now, is that it's all at 100%, because people have started owning and planning their work about why something must go to that point of 45 days and how many families actually we can provide an assessment much earlier on and an intervention much earlier on. So that's been a seismic shift in terms of looking at our culture around performance and understanding performance data as not something that sits out there, and embracing it, that actually data is only as good as what you do, and actually it gives you information, but that information we've got to use to provide us insight about why we're doing what we're doing and what is that telling us about our practice. And in switching that, it's helped us really shift our performance massively around assessments. Don't know what, yeah, back to you, team.
Back to Alistair.
Okay, so my next example is around anticipating demand. So this is a question which has been kind of long on the tip of the tongue for the various local authorities I've worked with and never been really solved. And then, like a lot of kind of things last year, it suddenly became a much more pressing question because we had some quite, I suppose apocalyptic is almost the right word, scenarios being mooted in the media and the sector around what was going to happen to social care front doors when lockdowns ended last year and schools which had been closed for several months suddenly opened, and this tidal wave of pent-up demand came and landed on the doorsteps. And so the question was, what's going to happen? Can we model it using data? And through a lot of very hard work in several different local authorities, starting with a model developed in Kent, but there were also people in Wiltshire, Surrey, all over the place working on similar things. We ran a project to quickly develop a tool that would let you load in your recent historical data using the standard Annex A format so that you didn't have to write any new reports, and then answer some questions about what you thought the local situation was like in terms of how long have the schools been off, how much of the normal demand do you think is not getting through, how much do you think is going to come back, are you going to have a trouble processing children out of care because your courts are closed or anything like this, asking those kind of questions, and then allowing you to model a scenario or multiple scenarios based on those assumptions for once lockdown ends, this is the kind of thing that might happen. And off the back of that, then you might be able to make some decisions about how to arrange your service, how to prioritise work that you're doing locally, what to prepare for, when to take leave, things like that. So the demand modelling tool that we built seeks to answer that question, what is going to happen, which is almost always impossible to answer accurately, but never impossible to say something useful about what might happen, and then allow service leaders to say, and what shall we do about it with the best knowledge we have. So over to you guys again.
Thanks, Alistair. So I can't remember exactly, but I think it was about 12 months or 18 months of data that you put into the model for the referrals that you received to social care. And it would then show you what the future volume of referrals is going to look like on a weekly basis. Usually there is a peak at November. We normally get lots of referrals coming in once schools are back and teachers become familiar with children and children open up more, and we see that peak. But what was really difficult was deciding exactly what that peak is going to look like in these unprecedented times, as they say. And What I've done for this chart that you're looking at now is the dotted red line was what the model was telling us was going to happen, and the dark blue line is me putting the actual referrals in of what actually then did happen. And as you can see, the model actually did a really good job of predicting we are going to see a peak in referrals in October, following quite a long period of low referrals, with the exception of when restrictions were eased in June and we got lots of referrals coming in. So it was a case of talking to Teresa again about the expectation around what is going to happen when schools reopen. We are expecting to see higher referral volumes, and for Teresa to prepare her service for that. And so again, I'll pass over to Teresa to talk more about what conversation she actually had about that.
I distinctly recall around March when we had the first announcement around lockdown, and as a front door head of service thinking, wow, never been in this sort of position before, as did probably every other person in my position across the country managing front door. And it brought back, I have to share this, a famous saying that my teacher in my convent school back home in India said, which was, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." So it was a bit like that, where I had this conversation with Jean, and we were thinking about what is this going to tell us around, suddenly things were getting quieter in terms of the volumes of referrals coming in and contacts coming in. But then the intensity of those were different. So we could see, even if the numbers were smaller, there were more police protections, there were far more emergencies, and the numbers of Section 47s and strats were pretty steady. So we didn't experience the quiet, which we would have experienced in terms of numbers. We also were thinking about, what do we do in terms of our workforce? First of all, how long is this going to go on for? And again, managing through the pandemic, it's about running the marathon, and it's not a short sprint. So how do we pace ourselves? So it came from that we agreed to do a little bit of a demand modeling exercise that Jean put together. And that was so helpful, because we know that traditionally November is very busy in terms of most front doors, as Jean highlighted. But put in the added context of the pandemic, we knew that we had to do something different and plan better. So we did a little mini restructure in terms of looking at our numbers of assessment teams to build resilience, to make sure there were enough people and enough hands on deck. We also looked at how people taking time offs, and making sure that there was enough rest in the system when things had gone quiet. Again, because everyone was clear, we didn't sort of hold back on this demand modeling exercise. We shared it with all staff and with all managers to make sure that wellness was factored in, and that going forward, when the spikes happened, we were able to ride that, and we were able to do it in a way that the front door would not end up getting backlogged, or we would not end up in a position where we didn't have enough people to respond to the rising volumes that came in. So that preparation we were able to do, and we were able to successfully take it upwards to our members, etc., to let them know, and the partnership, the local safeguarding partnership. So everyone was prepared, the partnership was prepared in terms of what that surge would look like. And what happened is, although it didn't turn out to be as bad as we thought, because we were that prepared, it felt that way, that it wasn't as bad as we thought. And had we not done that work, upon hindsight, I'm pretty sure we would have come a bit unstuck. And also in terms of our partners, we know that we need the colleagues to work alongside us in terms of these volumes and support us when things are going up and down. So that was a very useful exercise, and something that we know from learning that we will be doing more of.
Oh, we've lost Teresa. Has everyone lost Teresa, or just me?
Yes, I have as well. Okay.
Well, I can say just at the end of that the other exciting bit from this, from a data to insight point of view, is that the way we've the way we delivered this, it's that kind of thing that it's running off Annex A data, which you are already producing as a local authority, and it's a tool which we've kind of produced in full. So the cost of using it and seeing if it will work for your local context is extremely low. And then because of the data to insight approach of getting partners involved to help drive development, having this kind of small central resource that I represent at the moment, and having that there to kind of keep the support in place and keep things coordinated, means that we're in a great position to take this forward and keep it running for the longer term. And so possibly the only exciting thing about there still being lockdowns for me is that we now have the analogous data that we didn't have last year when we were trying to guess what would happen when we were building this modelling tool. If we're talking about the lockdown we're in now, we now have an analogous situation from last year where we can say this is when it started, this is when it ended and the schools went back, what actually happened, and let's apply that model of the world from 2020 to our current situation and when we think things are going to change, and almost build it into a more generic tool that says, well, just pick any like abnormal period of behavior that you think is going to happen for some reason. Tell us when it happened in your history. Tell us when you think it's going to happen in the future. And we can model, well, this is what happened to your front door, to your looked after children incoming, to your looked after children outgoing. Reuse it for your contacts instead of your referrals, if actually your referrals stayed steady and your contacts changed. And it's quite easy to do all those things based on this one thing that we kind of all share and chip into. So that's the exciting bit of it for me. Teresa, we lost you. Did you want to add anything, or should we skip on to the next example? We've got about 5 minutes left. We'll move forward. So last example, ethnicity and statutory process. So this is another one of those where I kind of like the assessment timeliness. The detail is what's interesting to me on this one. I'm interested to hear what Jean and Teresa say about it. But I think most people who are working for Children's Services Department and working in their community will know kind of instinctively or through experience what the general breakdown of ethnic origin, cultural background, what have you, is in the communities they're working in. But when you think about the social care process or workflow or pipeline or whatever you want to call it, whatever metaphor you want in terms of children arriving at a front door and then working through the system, having their needs met at different levels of engagement, how much do you know upfront about where the disparities are between the general ethnic background in your community and the kind of levels of people from different backgrounds at different stages or different levels in your social care process? And that's something that I think the chat in particular is really going to help him with.
Thanks, Alistair. So like Alistair says, this is another example from the chat. It's one of the final pages at the back, and it summarizes all of the ethnic groups at these broader categories. But I've only pulled out two just to make it easier for you to see it on the screen today, although on my screen the numbers are very hard to read, but I'll talk you through it. So what we are seeing in chat and across all areas of social care is that children who come from Black ethnic groups are overrepresented in the social care pathways compared to children who are attending schools in Wandsworth. And that is in direct contrast with children from white ethnic backgrounds who are underrepresented. But if you look a little bit more carefully, you can see that as you go through the pipeline, from referrals up to children looked after, there's actually an upward trend on the whole for children from Black ethnic backgrounds, where the further along you get with severity, there's more children who are from Black ethnic backgrounds. And particularly around children who are looked after and children who are care leavers. When Wandsworth had more children who were unaccompanied asylum seekers, we used to put it down to those children, and we used to say that we have lots of children who are asylum seekers coming from Africa who are recorded as having Black African ethnic groups. But now that we have much fewer asylum seekers in Wandsworth, which is different from many local authorities in London, I accept, but we are actually seeing that it has not made that difference to children looked after that we would have expected. And we have seen that it's because we do have vulnerable adolescents who do tend to be from Black Black British backgrounds, and they are overrepresented in our data. The interesting thing on the chart on the left is that for Section 47s, they are investigations that we carry out when we suspect that there might be significant harm to a child. It's an overrepresentation for children from Black ethnic backgrounds, but the ultimate outcome of Section 47 inquiry does tend to be a child protection plan to keep that child safe. But for that, it's very low. So the conversion from Section 47 to child protection plan for children from Black ethnic backgrounds is much lower. And when you look over on the right-hand side, Section 47s is lower than the child protection plan for children from white ethnic backgrounds, which means that once a child has a Section 47 and they're white, they're much more likely to be put on a child protection plan. And so there are questions there around how are decisions being made differently based on a child's ethnicity potentially. It's really early days, and we've done quite a big piece of work around looking at these thresholds and taking it to, again, to the service that Teresa has then taken to, again, the partnership. So I'll hand over to Teresa to talk about what this means in practice again.
So from my point of view, again, as someone who came into Wandsworth, it's been quite interesting because when you look at the demographics of Wandsworth and you look at the numbers of children generally who are subjected to referrals and contacts into children's services, it's quite high. And also within that, of course, this breakdown is telling us a narrative that we need to pay close attention to. What we are doing with this data is a lot wider. Firstly, we are looking at it with our schools, our school partnership, to think about actually what is it that we need to think at an early help stage, at a universal stage for some of these children and families. The other bit is also around our provisions in terms of voluntary and community sector. Are we engaging well with the existing resources in the community? And actually, if we did do that, would we have a different understanding of some of our families, and would we have a different picture of some of our families? So it's still work in progress. The other bit is also around our direct work with children and families, and that is not just about when they are subject to an assessment. This is looking at our entire data around our early help intervention, both targeted universal services. And we are now investing in a pathway around family group conferences at an earlier stage within our early help and MASH, so that we are looking at family resilience and family-based solutions for a lot of our families. So it's still early days, but there is a lot that we are looking at from this data to inform our practice. And it's a sobering thought, because there is something about how we've practiced thus far that seems a touch punitive from time to time for some of our Black families.
Thanks, Teresa. So those are our three worked examples. We've run over by about a minute on our allotted 30 minutes, but I think we're running into a Q&A session for MPI-MG and Data to Insight. So I'm just going to finish off by kind of noting that this is these are worked examples, but there are examples like this all over the chat and all over the benchmarking tool and all over the different tools that we provide that can slot into your workflow locally. And if you've got something great in one area, but you're missing a little bit somewhere else, then that's where I think Data to Insight can really step up and help you in terms of figuring out those extra bits and those extra ideas of things to look at.